أسعد الله أوقاتكم أعزائي المشاهدين، أهلا ومرحبا بكم. ضيفي في حلقة هذا الأسبوع من برنامج ضيف وقضية هما توم ستروب، أحد زعماء الحزب الجمهوري في جنوب شرق ولاية ميشيغان، والمعروف في الأوساط السياسية بالجمهوري الصلب، الذي يدافع عن مبادئ وأفكار وتطلعات الحزب بشكل دائم ومستمر داخل وخارج الحزب الجمهوري، وقد اكتسب احترام وتقدير كوادر الحزب في جميع مدن مقاطعة وين وولاية ميشيغان بشكل عام. والضيف الثاني هو الناشط السياسي في الحزب الجمهوري رجل الأعمال المعروف روبرت خزوز، الذي يؤمن بالعمل التطوعي ويعتبره حجر الأساس في تنمية وتقوية المجتمع الأمريكي، ويخدم في مجالس إدارات العديد من الهيئات، من بينها هيئة فرسان كولومبوس، وعين مؤخرا مفوضا في إدارة مفوضية الفنون في مدينة ليفونيا التي يعيش فيها، وهو حاصل على درجة الماجستير في إدارة الأعمال من جامعة سنترال ميشيغان، وبكالوريوس في العلوم السياسية من جامعة ميشيغان ستيت. أعزائي المشاهدين، يسرني استضافة الضيفين الكريمين. I would like to welcome both of you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Let me start with you, Tom. Maybe we can start by giving our viewers, Arab American and Chaldean, whoever watching us tonight, give us an overview of maybe historical background about the Republican Party, when the Republican Party was established and how it's evolved over the years.
Well, the Republican Party dates actually prior to Abraham Lincoln, who was our first Republican president that was elected. There is actually, it's an interesting conversation. There is a bit of a dispute as to when the party began, because some will claim that the party began in Wisconsin in the 1850s, whereas Jackson, Michigan actually claims to be the original home of the first meetings of the Republican Party. And, you know, at the time with the Republican Party in that time period, slavery was the major issue. And so Abraham Lincoln ran, and it's actually a fascinating piece of history to go back and look at his run for office in 1860, because at the Republican National Convention when he was nominated, he was one of several people who was running for office. He did not even go into that convention with the most number of votes going into it, and yet he came out as the Republican nominee and ended up becoming, you know, arguably, in my opinion, one of the greatest presidents in the history of our nation.
Most of the American people and those who knows American policy and politics and the presidency of the United States believe that Abraham Lincoln was one of the finest and the most popular president in the United States. The term GOP, what it refers to?
Well, it's GOP is the Grand Old Party, and where that originates from, that I don't know. But it has been a term that has been used for many years to refer to the Republican Party.
So the major and the most important aspects that distinguish the Republican Party from other parties, including the Democratic Party, is being what?
So Republicans have a party platform, and these are the founding principles and things that we believe in as a party. So, for example, we are of the belief that that government should be limited in its scope. We don't believe the purpose of the government is to manage and run our lives in every aspect of our life. So we have a tendency to believe in less regulation, unless it's absolutely necessary, is in our best interests. Because we want people to be free, and free to choose whatever job and live where they want and do what they want, and so with less restriction. And so that is one of our founding principles. So along with that, if we believe in a smaller, more limited, more efficient government, we also believe that taxes should be lower as well. So we're of the belief if you don't need as large a government as, for example, we have today at the federal level especially, that taxes should be lower. You should put more money back in the individual's pocket for them to spend as they please on whatever they want.
Sure. So the Democrats and Independent and other party do not believe in these things, or
you know what? And I'm
what
not
distinguished.
Yes, and I'm not an expert. I should not be speaking about the Green Party and the Democrat Party, but in general, Democrats are individuals who believe in more of a government and more regulation and higher taxes because they believe that government is what solves our nation's problems, whereas we believe free people can make wise decisions on their own that don't require the restrictions necessarily of a government.
I don't want to enter into philosophical question, and do you believe that the majority of the American people are capable of running themselves with the little government, as opposed to the belief of the Democrats, if you will, that the government, central government, is very important to run the life of the people?
Well, the answer to that question actually is rather complicated because, you know, I'm of the belief, for example, if you look at some of our nation's problems today, crime in particular, you have to look at what is the foundation of what causes these sorts of societal problems. And I would argue that it's the breakdown of the family unit. And so, you know, when we have children that are being born, 2 children out of wedlock, single parent households, that sort of things, that has a tendency and lends itself more towards the problems that we see in our society. Whereas a society is much more whole and much more stable and much more successful, I think, when couples are together and have children in marriage and things of that nature. And so obviously everyone, that's the thing with freedom. Is you're free to choose what decisions you're going to make, and some people make the wrong decisions, as we see.
But you have to be as much as possible educated and aware of what's happening in your community. And this is the objective of this program, to educate the maximum number of people about politics, about integration into the American culture and American way of life. Robert, as a young political activist and businessman in our community, what attracted you to the Republican Party?
Well, much of what Tom has said is very important to me. I think when you look at how this country was formed to begin, was with family, with small business, and volunteerism. And that's the values of a Republican Party. And basically, less government allows the freedom of people to choose where they wish to spend their money. Of course, taxation is important, but to a limited extent. That's Republicans believe, that we use only what we need for our infrastructure. The rest should go to small businesses. That's what this country was founded upon, was small business. And family is very important. And I, as Tom said, I don't believe that we need government to control our internal dealing in our own homes, and that's what really primarily what drove me to it.
Did you, Robert, study and understand fully the objective of other parties, including the Republican parties, before you made your decision to join the Republican Party?
Absolutely, and part of the things that are very clear to me. When you look at the two different parties, the predominantly Democratic and Republican Party, of course there's the Independent Party and others. The predominant parties are the Democratic and Republican Party. I think the most important things we look at when we make choices in our life is what represents you, and what represents your value system. And your value system is based on your beliefs and your principles. And when you look at what's important to you, obviously what's important to me is my family. I believe traditional marriage is important. I believe that a stable household is important. And when you look at those beliefs, and you look at the belief of running my business without having too much regulation and taxation, it allows me to grow and to reap the benefits of it. I believe those are directly in line with my belief system and my value system. I also believe many of the country's problems can be solved when you allow people to make their own choices.
Great.
And when you take those freedoms away by making them dependent on government handouts, on government things that are very attractive to Democratic people that are attracted to the Democratic Party, if you will, it is appealing, but it's a state of dependency. And that dependency is what's holding this country back from growing. And as time has continued to be fluid and grow, the family's eroding. So there is more of an independency and more people choosing Democratic. Whereas, you know, families and traditional families need to speak up. Volunteerism and speaking their voice, every person's voice counts. You may not think one person's voice counts, but it does. And a lot of these things don't pay. We need to understand that to belong to the country, you have to give back. And even if it's as simple as handing out flyers. And sometimes that will preserve the way of life that we believe in, our value systems and our beliefs. And I think based on my faith and based on my, my belief in my family and my business core, it's important for me, it goes to my core to be a Republican.
Thank you very much. Tom, the Republican convention is coming up
This
soon.
weekend.
This weekend.
Yes.
And what would be the most important features, if you will, of the convention?
So the convention that takes place this weekend will be the selection of delegates and corresponding alternates to our Republican National Convention, which takes place in July in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
And so what will happen is the convention is split over 2 days. So on Friday night, the delegates will all arrive in Lansing, and they will break off into the 14 different congressional districts. So I happen to live in the 11th congressional district, so the 11th congressional district will meet in one meeting room.
So Michigan has 14.
Has 14.
What is the significance of the number? 14.
The number is actually a mathematical formula that is each state has a certain number of representatives, and it's approximately, if my numbers
So
are right,
matching the number of the delegation in Washington?
well, yes, it matches the number of the delegation in Washington. That's
Okay.
correct. So we have 14 members of Congress today, so we have 14 congressional districts.
And you represent the
And
11th.
so I happen to live in the 11th.
Okay.
So when the 11th gets together on Friday night, they will elect 3 delegates and 3 alternates to represent us at the National Convention. And then on Saturday, there is what they refer to as the at-large slate of delegates and alternates.
Okay.
And they will be elected via a vote of the entire convention.
Okay.
And that will fill out all 59 delegates and 59 alternates
From Michigan.
from Michigan to represent
So,
Michigan.
so the total number of delegates from Michigan is 59.
Is 59, that's
based
correct.
on
That number is, for example, on Friday night, 3 times the 14 congressional districts
Okay.
is 42. And then the additional ones have to do with, we get one for our state party chairman, we get one for what we refer to as our national committee man and national committee woman. They are the 3 people who represent us all year long to the national party.
Okay.
So, for example, the chairman of the National Party right now is Reince Priebus.
Okay.
And he is elected at a meeting of all of the states, and their 3 individuals all get together, and that's how he gets elected.
You mentioned names, but based on what those delegates are selected?
Oh,
On
how are they chosen?
How they're choosing?
What are
and
their
what's
backgrounds?
Their qualifications.
Okay, what are their
What is the
qualifications? That's a great question. Because it is our party is a very grassroots-oriented party.
Okay.
The Democrat Party, if you follow the presidential politics that's going on right now, for example, today there is primaries going on in Wisconsin for both the Democrats and the Republicans. But the number of delegates that the media will tell you for each party is very different. Democrats use a lot of what we refer to as superdelegates.
Okay.
Where, let's say, let me use Michigan as an example.
Sure.
We have 14 members of Congress, 9 of which are Republican today. So in the Democrat Party, the other 5 who are Democrats, they would be superdelegates to a national convention for the Democrat Party.
So the super delegate, I like to understand that. And
So
I'm
they don't
sure
get elected.
So many people from within our community would love to and fully understand this. The super delegates are already elected to various positions.
They are already elected to certain positions already. And because of
including the delegation in Washington?
yes, so our
oh.
members of Congress
Okay.
are also going to be members of the delegation to the Democrat National Convention due to the fact that they are currently elected members of Congress
Okay.
from the Democrat Party.
Okay.
Whereas on the Republican side, we don't use superdelegates. So it's a very grassroots oriented. So what's happening right now as we speak is we're going to elect 3 delegates and 3 alternates in the 11th district on Friday.
Okay.
So what you have happening is various members of the grassroots of our party in the 11th district are campaigning right now and trying to get the delegates who were elected at a county convention.
They're campaigning within the Republican
They're
Party.
campaigning just within the
Within
11th
the-
district,
okay.
just within the delegates going to the state convention, which the number is, let's say it's about 160 or 180, I want to say. And so those individuals will elect the 3 delegates and 3 alternates. What generally happens is the people who run for these spots are people who have been involved in the party for a long period of time. So I happen to be a county chairman of a committee called the Wayne 11th Republican Committee, and one of my members of my committee is running right now to be a delegate to represent Donald Trump at the national convention. And what he will do is he will send out emails with his qualifications. He will call the delegates on the phone and campaign and make the case for why he should be selected to be that delegate. And then on Friday night when they get together, they will then elect who the 3 delegates and 3 alternates are.
And each selected delegate, or prior to selection of delegation, the delegate or the potential delegate have to identify who is his candidate.
Yes, we have in the Republican Party, and I don't know how the Democrats do
Okay.
it, but in the Republican Party, it's called a presidential preference form.
Okay.
It's a 1-page sheet which you fill out and say, I will support this presidential candidate. Donald Trump. In Michigan, we split our delegates on the Republican side between John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz. And so on Friday night in the 11th district, we will elect 1 delegate for Cruz, 1 for Trump, and 1 for Kasich, along with a corresponding alternate to go with each one of those. And you have to fill out this form, and you send it to the state party, and you say, I want to run to be a delegate, and I wish to represent this candidate. And you declare who that candidate is when you turn the form in.
So it does not matter in the past couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that Donald Trump from the Republican or the Republican candidate won Michigan. It does not matter, or it does matter.
It does matter because what it does is the election results in the primary determines how many delegates each one of the candidates gets.
Oh, okay.
So in our case, 24 of our 59 will be Donald Trump delegates.
Okay.
17 will be Ted Cruz, 17 will be John Kasich, based on the results of that primary vote.
Okay.
Yep.
At the convention, at the general convention, which is, you mentioned, will be in Ohio, right?
Yes, in July in Cleveland, Ohio, that's correct.
Yeah. What is the significance? Why Ohio? I mean, I was told that Ohio, any Republican candidate will never win the presidency unless he or she win Ohio.
And that the
Is it true?
decision of where a national convention is to be held is determined by the national party, which I talked about. Reince Priebus is our chairman,
Sure.
and we have our three people who represent Michigan. They got together 2 years ago and chose Cleveland, Ohio, out of a list of a dozen different locations that applied and made a case to the national party that they wanted to host the convention. It is a general rule based on the demographics of the United States that in order for a Republican to win the presidency, there are certain states that you have to win, and Ohio is one of those. It's what we refer to, like Florida is a swing state. It's a state that, depending on the presidential election, will swing one party or the other.
Sure.
Whereas some states, California, will always vote Democrat.
Right.
Based on the nature of its demographics. Whereas Utah will always vote Republican.
Does it mean that, I don't want to get into names, but does it mean that Donald Trump lost Ohio, he won't be nominated, or it does not?
Makes no difference. Because when the vote took place in Ohio, and John Kasich is the governor of Ohio who won, all that determines is the number of delegates from that state to represent Ohio at the national convention. Because remember, this convention gathers the delegates from all 50 states, as well as U.S. territories, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Marianas Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, all send delegates to this national convention.
Sure.
It's approximately 2,500 people who will have a vote.
At the general convention, the convention or the delegate will decide who will be the party candidate, right?
Correct.
And at that time, primary end, it will be seized.
Yes,
there won't be any
the last primaries to take place will be June the 7th.
Prior to the
and
convention.
prior to the national convention, which is in July.
Right. And the convention will present a picture of two candidates highly opposed to each other, one Democrat and one Republican, right?
Yes.
And they will fight, if you will, among each other, both of them, one of them will be elected as a president.
Correct.
Do you believe, following and being involved in politics and Republican and knowing the American politics, we will expect or anticipate any surprises during the convention?
I do. I do. As we sit here today, which is April the 5th, with our election cycle that's still taking place, we still have 2 months of primaries to go. I do not believe at this moment that Donald Trump, who currently leads in the number of delegates, I believe he has 736, if I remember correctly.
Right.
I do not believe he will get to the 50% plus one that he needs.
How many usually? 50% of?
He needs, the magic number for him is
11.
he needs to 1,237.
Okay.
If he goes into the convention with that number or higher, then he will win the nomination on the first ballot. But if he goes into the convention less than that number, then the media sometimes refers to it as a brokered convention, but I really don't like that term because that suggests that someone is manipulating the results. Correct. In reality, I like the term, it's a contested convention. So what will happen is on the first ballot, they will, the people who have filled out their presidential preference forms, for example, in Michigan, you are required to vote for that person on the first ballot. So if no one gets to 1,237 on the first ballot, they will go to a second ballot. And they will keep going ballot after ballot until someone gets to that magic number. And one of the things people need to remember about this process is you have candidates who have now exited the race.
Sure.
So for example, I was a Marco Rubio supporter.
Right.
He had won 163 delegates.
What happened to these delegates?
So his delegates right now, he still holds on to control of those delegates. Now what may happen is by a second ballot, they could get released, and what will happen is basically virtually all the delegates by the second ballot are free to vote for whoever they want.
Okay.
And so the results will suddenly start changing because, for example, I just indicated I was a Rubio supporter.
Sure.
I, for example, could run to be a delegate to represent Donald Trump or Ted Cruz on Friday, get elected, and I have to vote for that person on the first ballot only. I could vote for somebody else on the second ballot.
Would there be wheeling and dealing during the convention? I mean, people will try to convince you to support Donald Trump as opposed to other
Yes, so
candidates.
what will happen is when we get through June 7th, which is the final day of the primaries, and we see that no one has gotten to 1,237, The wheeling and dealing will begin already, okay? Because the campaigns will have identified who all these delegates are.
Okay.
They will start making phone calls and talking to them and finding out, are you really a supporter of this candidate? Are you open to this possibility? There will be wheeling and dealing going on before we even arrive in Cleveland. And then more of it will take place after that first ballot. And we have not seen this happen in American politics, really, since the, I think, 1960 is about the time the Democrats had that happen. And the Republicans had it happen back in the 50s. But you know, we live in a much different era today with 24-hour news cycles and that sort of thing. It will be a fascinating, social media, Twitter and Facebook and et cetera. It would be a fascinating moment in American history to watch that process take place, that you're going to have 2,500 people are going to decide who our candidate is to represent us.
So many people from within our community, they ask me when they heard that I am going to interview you and Robert, ask them why the Republican Party in general do not agree among themselves for one candidate, and they will beat the hell out of the Democrats if they want to. Does it work this way, or American politics is different?
American politics, this gets back to what we talked about, which is about freedom. The Constitution specifies what the requirements are in order to run for president. You have to be 35 years old and a natural-born citizen. Anybody can run. I could have run this time around if I wanted to.
You look like a president.
Thank you.
I mean, you should. And I'm imagining myself now interviewing a candidate for the presidency.
There you go. So, we started with 17 people in this process. We have 3 that remain. And this is something that we do as a Republican Party. We have this knock-down, drag-out primary process to eventually come up with our candidate that will represent us. And, I've only been in the party 15 years, and so, I have a lot of memories. I was an alternate delegate in 2012 for Mitt Romney. In fact, I was the alternate to our current state party chairman, Ronna Romney McDaniel, which is Mitt Romney's niece. And in 2008, I went as a guest. But as I remember, in 2008, we had 9 people run, and we ended up with John McCain. And in 2012, I want to say we had maybe 7 people run, and we ended up with Mitt Romney. This time, it happened to be a bigger field of people. It's just the way American politics works.
We would like to stop for commercial for a few seconds and we will be back. أعزائي المشاهدين، تابعونا بعد لحظات. سنتابع الحديث مع الضيفين الكريمين بعد هذا الفاصل الإعلاني، فابقوا معنا. We will be back with more stuff right after this message. Remain with us. Robert, as a young activist in the political arena of the United States, with the Republican in particular, do you inspire to become a delegate? And what does it take for you to join the delegation?
Well, I hope to earn the respect of my fellow Republicans. To earn a delegate position, that would be an honor. But it takes time, and that's the part of the political process, as Thomas said, is that's what makes America beautiful, is that we as a Republican Party debate amongst each other what's right and what's wrong for our party, rather than having, for instance, superdelegates who are automatically placed. We decide who goes based on intellectual conversation, which will happen in the convention in Ohio. So for myself, yes, I would be more than willing to be a delegate, and more than happy to be if I had that honor. But obviously it'll take some time for me to learn more about my party, learn more about the Republican 11 in our district, and to become more familiar with the whole process, because there are very intricate details as far as the rules and regulations and what to do and how to do them. But most importantly, I think, is representing the values again. I mean, this country really, honestly, left England because of oppression of government. And we came to be free of that oppression of government. And that's what we want. We want less government in our life.
Robert, how do you transfer this beautiful message, convincing message, to the the maximum number of people within our community? I know that whenever opportunity presents itself, to you or for you.
Right.
You talk about your experience, you talk
Correct.
about involvement in the Republican Party. What does it take in order to utilize all of your resources to attract so many people to the Republican Party?
Well, that's a good question because I am asked a lot by my friends and family, and I will tell you it's simple. It's simple to me. What are your core values? Do you believe in family? Do you believe in protecting what you've earned in your business? Or if you don't have a business, do you believe that you just need to step up and find a great job, and hopefully you create a great career from that? That will end up creating many jobs, which will create a much better economy for the United States and for Michigan. And that is the tool for growth, is from bottom up. It doesn't start with government, it starts with people. So for myself, it's very important to get that message out to my family and friends. When I look at it, I explain to them simply, if you are an individual, you probably believe in individual values. But if you're a family, which most of our audiences have families, they probably will look at things like Obamacare, LGBT community.
Sure.
Nothing is wrong with having your own opinion. There is no right or wrong. It just, should we pay for it as a whole? Should we all use our tax dollars to be paying for those things? And I'm not here to say that anybody's belief system is wrong, that it's better or right, but my belief system is that I do not believe that a personal preference, for instance, on marriage, or a personal preference on health care should be forced upon the masses, upon everyone in the country. It should be something that the people decide. And when they decide through a vote, and it comes up with almost every decision that comes up in elections, in local elections and national elections. It's important to vote your beliefs, and so that you can protect those. So for me, it's simple. When I talk to my family and friends, I say, what is it that you value the most in your life? That's what you need to protect. And they are pretty much in line with the Republican values when you look at it.
You mentioned, Tom, while you were talking about the delegation from various states, you mentioned Puerto Rico. I was told, I don't know whether this is true or not, Puerto Rico and District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., have no, or the citizen of these two states, if you will, do not allow to vote. Is it true?
They do not have, for example, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico are not declared as states.
Okay.
And so they don't, for example, District of Columbia doesn't have an elected member to Congress. But it's interesting because in our primary process and in our party system, despite the fact they may not be states per se, these various territories do get to send representatives to our national convention to help us choose who the candidate would be on the ballot come November. And so that includes Puerto Rico and Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Marianas Islands,
and
all
District
those.
of Columbia.
And District of Columbia, that's correct.
So
they will have a delegation.
What is the number of delegation, for example, in District of Columbia?
So the smaller areas like District of Columbia and Guam and Marianas Islands, it's 9.
Oh, 9.
Puerto Rico actually has more than that,
Do they count,
based on population.
Do they count on the number of a delegation that a given candidate will ultimately get, or it's ceremonial?
No, it is not ceremonial. They will be a voting delegate just like those who represent Michigan to help choose who our party representative is. So for example, the U.S. Virgin Islands is sending 9 people, but they chose to send a delegation as undeclared.
Okay.
So they have not declared who they're going to vote for.
Okay.
So when we talked about how if Donald Trump, for example, doesn't get to 1,237 delegates between June 7th and our convention in mid-July, there will be a lot of conversations with those individuals to see if they can sway them to one candidate or another.
I would like to talk with you, because I'm learning a lot from you and from Robert about the image of Republican Party. It is ironic, and we talked about this before we came to the studio. that the Republican Party initially was the party that began the coalition of anti-racism or anti-slavery, and it was known long ago, years ago, as the party of women and minority, as opposed to now shrinking, no women and no minority, or very little number of women and minority joining the Republican Party. I was told by an African American friend that every black, and we talked about this earlier, that joined the Congress, was elected to the Congress, to the House of Representatives, prior to the year 1935, all of them, the House of Representative members, were Republican, African American Republican. And prior to 1978, all U.S. senators, African American, were all Republican. What happened?
Yeah, I wish I could wave my magic wand and tell you exactly what happened, because it is one of the great disappointments that I have as a Republican to see the party of Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, the party that was the majority vote to pass the Civil Rights Amendments in the 1960s. We are the party that represents the minority. And yet what we have seen, especially in the last 30 years, is I think there's a lot of factors that go on there. Part of it may be due to the 24-hour news cycle we live in nowadays, the bias that exists in the media today. No offense intended.
We are ethnic media, so
yeah, so it's different.
We are not included, yes.
So that may be part of it. Part of it may be the education that that people are getting, especially at the higher education level. There are many of us as conservative Republicans who believe that many of our higher education institutions are biased more towards Democrat beliefs. That has an impact on that. But you're right, it is, if we look at Mitt Romney and why he lost, he only received 33% of the Hispanic vote. He received maybe 10% of the African American vote. It's very disappointing to see that. Now, if you look, especially the African American community is one that really bothers me, because some African Americans, for example, let's take the city of Detroit, which is primarily poor areas. The African Americans turn out and vote for Democrats.
Right.
That's what they do. But
without questioning,
without question,
investigation, without.
In some instances, yes,
Yeah.
you're correct. And I think what's happening there is these are people who have become reliant upon government. It's about food stamps, it's welfare, it's all those things. And what happens is the Democrat Party will go out and tell you, if you vote for a Republican, they're going to cut you off of food stamps, and they're going to take your welfare away, and that sort of thing. And even though
and to what extent this is true?
It's not. But I hear this, and these are the accusations. We've heard, for example, my entire life, every election cycle, every 4 years, oh, if you elect a Republican president, he's going to cut Social Security.
Sure.
It's never been cut in my lifetime.
That's right.
Okay, but Republicans are people who look at Social Security and they say to ourselves, all right, we have a system right now that is on its way to bankruptcy. We have to fix this system, and we need to make some changes, and we need to have an honest conversation with the American public of how we're going to do that. Democrats don't want to do that. They want to pass the buck down the road. So that's an example. So I think you have a certain number of individuals who end up on government subsidies and that sort of thing, like welfare and food stamps. Whereas there's two different philosophies. Republicans do believe in what I refer to as the social safety net. I believe in welfare, but
for those who are indigent and need and they cannot
But here's the
help themselves.
thing, we believe that welfare is something that is a hand up, not necessarily a handout. We want to help you go back to being a productive member of society and get a good job and a good education, and where you don't need these anymore. It has to be there because people need help. I have a brother, actually, who's now been out of work since the economy crashed in 2008. And he recently started receiving food stamps because he hasn't been able to find a job, and our family has helped to support him. I gave him a job for a while at my small business, just so he could pay his bills and that sort of thing. So we believe that the social safety net needs to be there to help people, but it shouldn't be there for your lifetime.
Right. Some would argue, Tom and Robert, that what we are talking about here, the number of welfare recipients or the number of people who dependent on the system does not exceed in the state of Michigan. In Michigan, we have, what is the population, 10.5 million?
Actually, I think we're just under 10 million now.
Under 10 million. People moving from the state, right?
During the recession, we had a lot of people moved out, yes.
Yeah. We have approximately 320,000 welfare recipients. The majority of them are really in desperate need of help because they are indigent. They cannot work. They cannot do anything. Maybe out of the 320,000 people, I don't know if the number is accurate, but this was my information maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. I don't know now. The number may be a lot less or more than 320.
I suspect after the recession we've just gone through,
the
number is probably much higher, because I know at a national level, we've gone up from, I want to say, 28 or 30 million on welfare up to 47 million, all since 2008.
On the national level.
Yes, at the national level. So I'm sure it's gone up in Michigan as well.
But that's why they refer all over the world. They refer to America as the welfare country. It's not even helping its own people, but countries around the world. Each and every poor country that part of the support of the United States of America, they give form of welfare. Like Egypt receive $2 billion a year, and
we give
Israel
money to dozens and dozens of countries all over the world.
All over the world. Why not? Some will argue, why not the poor American people? Why the Republicans are so tough on their own people?
Well, like I said, it's not that we don't believe in that social safety net. So, for example, in Michigan, if I'm correct, I believe the welfare system is designed that it's, I believe 4 years is your limit that you're allowed to be on welfare.
Right.
And what we want to do for that person who has to go on welfare is we want to say, okay, can we get you some job skills and find you a job so you don't need welfare anymore? And so there's training programs and education that they can apply for and get for free as part of that process of developing them as an individual so that they can be independent and not need welfare any longer.
So you support programs like job training and placement for people to learn skill and to become ultimately independent instead of becoming dependent on the system for a long period of time. Let's go back a little bit to the Republican Party. And prior to each and every presidential election in the United States, we hear alien terms, that it's not only alien to the newcomers or to the minority groups or to ethnic groups, but to so many from the mainstream. Like you mentioned earlier, swing states. Battle state. What is the battle state referring to?
So, as we look at presidential election cycles in the United States between Democrats and Republicans, based on the demographics of each individual state, there are some states that we know will vote in certain ways.
Okay.
And so what happens in a presidential cycle, whoever the Republicans nominate, whoever the Democrats nominate, they will challenge each other coming out of July and the two conventions right up until November to the general election. But what you'll see happen is they will spend most of their time in probably 7, 8, 9 states out of the 50. They're not going to visit all of them because unless they're visiting one to raise money. So, for example, you'll see a Republican presidential candidate visit California, but primarily it'll be a money-raising trip. It won't necessarily be campaigning to try and win California because California's demographics lends itself more to Democrats voting over Republicans.
And nothing can change it, right?
Well, the demographics of every state changes every 4 years because people move in and out of states. Minority populations rise and
Michigan
lower.
changed because they had before, maybe 10 years ago, 16 delegation to the Congress, now or to the U.S. Congress.
Yes,
now they have 14.
Now we have 14, and there is some who believe that in 2020, when we do our next census,
We'll have 10.
the population, we may go down from 14 to 13. We may lose another one. Each one of them represents about 650,000 people, if I remember my numbers correctly.
Right. And it's all on the expense of the Republican or Democrat, or it does not matter?
In that case, you're talking about a member of Congress, and it doesn't matter which party they're from. You would see the total number in the state of Michigan go from 14 to 13.
So the term battle and
battleground
battleground, it's swing states.
Swing
it's the same.
states.
And purple states?
Yeah, so you get, the two parties have a tendency, the media refers to them by colors.
Right.
They say, okay, a red state is Republican and a blue state is Democrat. And a purple state, which some people feel Michigan is a purple state, for example, because look at Michigan today. Michigan has not voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 1988 and George Herbert Walker Bush. So Democrats have won every cycle since then. But right now at the state level, the Republican Party controls the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the state legislature is controlled by Republicans, the state senate is controlled by Republicans. So it's an interesting, that's why we're kind of referred to as a purple state, because Republicans have control at the state level, and yet Democrat candidates tend to win at the presidential level.
How about split tickets? What's split tickets referred to?
So split ticket is, we used to have a system in Michigan, which actually just recently was repealed, where you could vote straight party ticket. I could go in on election day and I could cast my ballot for all the Republicans on my ballot by pulling one lever or filling in one circle on my ballot.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. The state legislature passed a bill that was signed by our governor to remove the straight party ticket voting. And the principle behind that is you should be voting for the individual and does that individual represent your beliefs, as Robert talked about? That is what's important. So we want the voters to take the time to go down the ballot with each one of the positions and vote based on the person that most represents them.
It does not matter Republican, Democrat, or Green Party,
that's
or
correct.
Independent.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
The most qualified.
The most qualified. We would like to stop for commercial for a few seconds and we will be back. أعزائي المشاهدين تابعونا بعد لحظات، سنتابع الحديث مع الضيفين الكريمين بعد هذا الفاصل الإعلاني، فابقوا معنا. We will be back with more stuff right after this message. Remain with us. Maybe very soon we will schedule an entire interview in this studio here to explain maybe the position of the party, the Republican Party, on issues related to economic, foreign policy, the environment, if you want, the issues related to welfare and what have you. I would like to ask Robert about your inspiration, as a young activist within the Republican Party. What would be your dream to run for president of the United States? You won't be eligible because you born here, or
no? I came when I was 2 years old.
Yes. Yeah. Where are you going? I know that you are member of various entities, organization. A couple of weeks ago, you were selected as a commissioner for the art in
more than a couple
in Livonia.
Yeah, it's been over a year and a half.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But you announced it just recently. Where are you going?
Well, you know, my intentions are volunteerism. I don't necessarily aspire to a certain seat or a certain office. If people believe that I have the qualifications or the right demeanor, the right words, things to say to help the party, I would be more than happy to accept any seat that's offered. But my aspiration is to, you know, I'd like to stay at a local level at this point. Eventually, I will run for city council. And if it goes any further than that, it's a possibility. But I really don't have an agenda.
When
for
one
higher
run for city council from within the Republican Party,
Correct.
Is he or she allowed to receive votes from Democrats? Or it
So
does
here's
not?
the interesting thing about city politics. So you're a resident of Livonia, I
Correct.
believe, if I remember correctly.
Sure.
In Livonia, the election of the mayor and the city council are nonpartisan races.
Oh, okay.
And so you actually don't declare a party on the ballot.
Okay.
But in reality, what goes on behind the scenes
Sure.
is you have Republican grassroots people supporting Republican candidates, and you have Democrats supporting Democratic candidates.
Just like
Correct.
the judgemanship. You know, judges, they don't run on
They're
party
nonpartisan.
affiliation, but, you know, they
Well-
in their heart, maybe some of them are Republican and others are Democrats. I would like to ask you maybe about when we were talking about Republican, there is moderate Republican, conservative Republican. When you mention the governor, he's always referred to as moderate Republican, right?
Yeah, so when I describe the Republican Party to people, I often mention that the party is made up of a variety of factions. We all don't walk lockstep and believe in all the same things. So, for example, there are people involved in our party that are involved, like when I first got involved. I'm what I refer to as a fiscal conservative. I got involved in the party because I was not happy with the size of government, with the amount of taxation and regulation. That's a fiscal Republican. Then you have social conservatives who are members of the party. They're people of faith. They are people who believe in life, in the discussion of
Against
abortion and things of that nature. So they get involved because the Republican Party is a home for those sorts of individuals. And of course you have people who cross those different boundaries. The governor is a very interesting analysis to look at, because the governor, prior to being elected the first time, really had not been involved in Republican politics in any way. He'd been a CEO of Gateway Computer and a businessman. But he is a somewhat
supporter maybe of the Republican
He was a
Party.
supporter, that's true. But he was fortunate to run in a primary against several other more well-known names who had been involved in the party for a number of years, had had elected positions. One was a congressman, one was an attorney general. But in that primary system, the electorate at that point in time felt that the businessman was what Michigan needed, because Michigan was having annual budget deficits they had to deal with, and people were leaving the state to seek jobs and go elsewhere. We're having what we refer to as the brain drain. Our young people are going to these great universities in our state and then leaving to take jobs in Chicago and New York because there weren't jobs here for them. And so I think the governor capitalized on that opportunity, and that's how he ended up getting elected. So he is kind of considered more of a moderate type of Republican because he has supported certain aspects that other members of our party were not happy with. So one of them, for example, was part of Obamacare, the health care exchanges. He created the healthcare exchanges in Michigan. He supported an expansion of Medicare in the state for those poor people who could not afford healthcare.
Right.
And it was part of the Obamacare package where the federal government would pay for the healthcare for these individuals.
And they give subsidy to the state.
Yeah,
from the
they give
federal
subsidies to
government.
the state in order to
Sure.
cover the cost,
Right.
but there's strings attached. And the string that's attached is we, the federal government, will fund 100% of this program for only the first 2 or 3 years.
Then
And
you
after
are on
that,
your own.
we're going to start weaning you off this money, and you, as a state, will have to come up with it in your own budget to pay
And it's
for
been
it.
2 years.
And it
It's
has
more
been
than-
2 years, yeah. So we are getting to that point where the state is going to have to start picking up the bill for these individuals, and that is where Republicans are opposed to that, because we struggled so hard to get our house in order and to fix our budget problems in the state. We think that this could have a severe impact on our state budget to have to pay for this program that the federal government creates, pays for a few years, and then wants us to cover it.
Do you consider yourself moderate Republican or conservative?
I would
Republican?
consider myself more conservative side, especially on the fiscal conservative side of
Right.
things. I might be considered by some people a little more moderate on social related issues.
Okay.
So-
How do you perceive what's happening now in Flint, the water crisis? I mean, the governor has been attacked by so many groups and people simply because he's a Republican. I believe, this is my own opinion, obviously does not represent this TV. This is my own opinion. I like the governor very much, and I think he did great things to the state of Michigan at all levels, especially to the city of Detroit. But nonetheless, he's really receiving back so much attack and unfair one. How do you perceive this?
Yeah, it's very disappointing to see the political gamesmanship that's going
Sure.
on regarding Flint. Because if we go back and look at what caused this problem, Flint was under an emergency financial manager. They were looking for ways, because they didn't want to go bankrupt, they were looking for ways to save money. They decided that moving to a different water system and moving off of Detroit's water system was in their best interests.
Sure.
And so, per their contract to Detroit Water, they notified them that they would be leaving in a period, they planned on a transition of 2 or 3 years to make the transition over. But in the contract, Detroit Water had, in their contract, they were allowed to give a 12-month notice and say, you got 12 more months and we're cutting you off.
Sure.
So now Flint found themselves in this rush. We need an alternative, a temporary solution. Let's draw water from the Flint River. And what a lot of people forget is in this whole process is that if the people treating the water had added the correct additives that would have prevented the lead from coming out of the pipes,
And this
we
has
wouldn't be
nothing to
having
do-
this conversation.
This has nothing to do with the state.
This has nothing to do with the state. It has nothing to do with the governor. This was a decision being made by the water department that's monitored by the Department of Environmental Quality, which is a state agency, which is also monitored by the EPA, which is a federal agency. They're all supposed to be looking out for our best interests,
Sure.
and they
But
all
they did
dropped the
not.
ball. And so the city council in Flint voted approval for it. The mayor voted for approval. This emergency manager was for it. And the interesting thing is, okay, the emergency manager was appointed by a Republican governor, so they call him a Republican. But if you actually look at who that emergency manager was, he's a Democrat.
He's more Democrat than the
Yeah, he's more Democrat than
themselves.
Republican.
Yes, yes.
This is not a partisan issue. This was a failure at all levels of government. But you know what? The governor, to his credit, has said, you know what? The buck stops with me.
Sure.
I'm the boss, and my staff and the Department of Environmental Quality, we should have been more diligent about following up with the complaints and knowing what was going on. And he feels guilty about what happened. He's not one to defend himself. He's not going to go out there and tell all the things we just talked about in the last 2 minutes.
You don't think he will resign or will be forced to resign?
No.
No.
No, I don't believe
Out
he'll
of the
resign.
question.
I don't
But
think he's
he
going to
will be
get
forced.
he-
There's
I don't think he's going to be
attempt
forced
now to collect signatures,
Yes.
and people are very, very active and very aggressive
Yes.
I should say.
But the threshold, the number of signatures you need to
700.
get that even on the ballot is a very high number, 700,000 or 800,000 or
Yes,
something like that.
700,000.
And those of us who have been through petition processes would tell you, you don't collect 700,000 signatures if that's what you need. You collect 1 million signatures because some of those signatures are going to get thrown out.
Sure.
They're not registered voters, they're not
Right.
residents of Michigan, they
Right.
were visiting, whatever. So you need to collect more than what that number is.
In order
You
to
have
reach
this
that.
narrow window you have to collect those signatures in, and it's all written in state law. I don't think it'll make the ballot. If it does, then he will have to campaign and make the case for why he should keep his job, which I think he should.
That's right.
But we'll have to wait and see how that process plays out.
Time is running out. I mean, we have more than 1 hour this interview. Najib, I want you, Robert, I want you to say a few words to our community members to maybe motivate them to join your party or to get involved in politics in general, not necessarily Republican Party. What do you say to them?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I want to thank you for the interview. It's very important to be a factual gatherer rather than an entertainer. And that's what we see a lot in the media right now is people who are trying to get people's opinions swayed one way or the other through not the right facts. It's really theatrics. And what I would say to my community and the people that are watching, it's very important to do your homework, find out what's happening, and then get involved. Make a difference, because that's the only way things change. If you follow what's said on TV, and with all respect to the media, if you follow what's told to you, what's fed to you, you're not seeing the whole picture, and you're becoming more and more dependent on the simple question of Republican and Democrat, which is being fed government down your throat. And that's what we don't want. We don't want government forced on us. And I think the more you educate yourself on the issues, women are very important. They're not only a major decision maker in a household, sometimes in many cases they are the decision maker in the household. And I think it's very important for them to understand also that the more jobs you create, the better it will be for your family, because then you will not be forced to have 2 incomes, and one person may, whoever that may be in the household, may be able to raise your own children and provide them with a stable upbringing, which will stop the madness of what's happening in the country, because people are going without parental guidance, without faithful guidance. And that's what we're missing. So
well said. Thank you, Najib.
I appreciate the time,
Robert?
and thank you very much.
Thank you. Tom, you have the last word.
Yeah, I would just say that the Republican Party we are an open party. We're a party that, I was not involved in Republican politics until 2001. And I walked into a little Redford Township Republican Club meeting not knowing anyone in the room, because I decided I could not, sit on my sofa and watch the process take place without getting involved. And I have loved being involved in politics, and I invite anyone who has an interest. You're welcome to come to our meetings. The Michigan GOP has a website. All of our events are listed there. We have various dinners and picnics and monthly meetings that we have. I would welcome anyone to come and join us and see the process and ask questions.
Thank you very much. And as I said earlier, we will schedule another interview to talk about the Republican Party position on a lot of issues, especially foreign policy. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation and coming to the studio and talking directly to our community members. Thank you, and I appreciate your being here. أعزائي المشاهدين، شكرا لإصغائكم ومتابعتكم، وحتى ألتقي معكم في الأسبوع القادم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج ضيف وقضية. لكم مني ومن أسرة البرنامج أجمل تحية، والسلام عليكم.